I'm here with Erica Cirino, and she wrote Thicker Than Water, The Quest for Solutions to the Plastic Crisis. Thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you for having me.
Um, I loved your book. I thought it was beautifully written, and it covered so much in so few pages, and it was so thought-provoking. What catalyzed this book for you? How did you start writing it?
Yeah, well, thank you. I began my journey on plastic by working as a science journalist, freelancing, doing different types of photojournalism projects, always relating to environment and wildlife. But then slowly over time, I began writing more and more about plastic. And this issue really was on the forefront of my mind my whole life, really. I was a wildlife rehabilitator in my younger years. And in my mid-20s, again, working in journalism, I started wondering what was everything? What was all the hubbub about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch? Because it was all in the news. Everyone was talking about ocean plastic at that time. And to me, it seemed like there was something missing from the story because, again, being someone who worked with wildlife, I've seen up close the real life consequences of our plastic use on the natural world. So from dealing with birds that were entangled or turtles that had ingested plastic, there are so many casualties that I've seen firsthand. And I knew that the issue had to be bigger than just a floating dump in the ocean. So that garbage island in the Pacific Ocean, ended up being something very, very different, which I witnessed when I sailed across it. And that was what catalyzed the idea to write a book because my suspicions were definitely confirmed on that trip.
Mm, yeah. Um, so when you were writing the book, were there was there anything that surprised you? Any details that, you thought, oh, wow, I didn't expect that link between plastic and XYZ?
Well, yeah, there's definitely a lot of things that were surprising. And that's mainly because there's just so much misinformation about plastic that exists and that's been intentionally spread by the industries that profit off of it. And the biggest interconnection that I think is commonly overlooked is the connection to plastic and all different types of pollution, not just plastic itself and the injustice that this pollution drives. So focusing much of my book on environmental injustice and plastics and petrochemicals was very intentional because this is something that's been, as I researched it, really realizing how grave and wide scale the problem is that this is like an issue that affects so many people all around the world, not just in the United States, even though I focus part of my book on the US, on so-called Cancer Alley in Louisiana. But this problem, it starts from the moment that plastics, fossil fuel ingredients are extracted. It never ends as long as plastic eternally exists. But it's also driven during these little scene processes like storage of plastics and petrochemicals, storage to transportation of those ingredients and plastics themselves, their use in our lives, in our homes, in our schools and industries and businesses. There's just plastic everywhere. And so we're talking about all different types of pollution, from toxic chemicals in the air to plastic particles that eventually make their ways into our bodies. So just there's a lot going on here, and it's not this simple issue of, the issue that we've been sold, there's plastic floating in the ocean. It's way deeper than that and way more complicated.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the stories that I found really interesting was, we know about the image of the plastic straw with the turtle, but I didn't know, and I'm sure most of the people who use plastic don't know how microplastics on the beach can impact turtle populations and how they reproduce. And I'm wondering if you can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, that was another one of those more shocking findings that I wanted to highlight as well. And this is something that, is just one case of plastic causing maybe an unforeseen consequence. So plastic is an insulating material generally, and when it blankets a beach, it raises the temperature of the sand. So it's kind of like putting a layer of insulation over the sand. And on a warming globe in the era of climate change, this warming is sped up by the presence of plastic. So it's like a multitude of issues acting at once. So the plastic is warming the beaches, the climate is warming as well, and sea turtle eggs hatch different sexes depending on the temperature. So cooler temperatures are linked to more male turtles that hatch, and warmer temperatures are linked to more female turtles. So large populations of sea turtles are actually feminizing. And so when you have an imbalance of sex within these sea turtle populations, it can lead to issues with fertility and continued reproduction of the species. So we could be seeing a future. We know that we're in an era of extinction driven by human actions already, but these kind of consequences that aren't maybe apparently linked to, say, a turtle eating plastic or being exposed to the chemicals, but rather the beach itself changing its whole nature, is really an unbelievable thing. And thinking of just one type of animal, a sea turtle, and then thinking, well, there's millions of other animals that we might be worried about, is a really big question and a big concern for scientists and for all of us, really.
Yeah, yeah, it was, I think often people are just living their lives and they're not thinking in a systems perspective, and how, the use of our use of plastic can end up in the on the sand and affect, a turtle's life cycle. Another thing I wanted to ask you about was, so the book is filled with all of these solutions, or different ways we can create solutions, and I think often when you talk about plastic, people are like, well, what are we supposed to do? That's such a big question. And I'm wondering, how do you answer it? Do you say, read my book, read through all these different potential solutions, or what's the right way to talk about how you solve this problem?
Yeah, that is like the $1 million question, really, right? What do we do about this? Like, just again, stating the facts, like plastic pollutes from the moment its petrochemical ingredients are extracted to the minute that it's either discarded or lost at the end of its useful life, and then all throughout, disproportionately impacting Black, Brown, Indigenous, low income, and rural communities. So the most underserved communities in the world. And that's so many people, that's billions of people. It's not just like, not that would, it doesn't minimize the issue if it was just a few people, but it is a very large population that's being worst impacted. And to know that solving the problem is not going to be as easy as we were told it would be by the industry. So we've been exposed to so much media and misinformation, again, through PSAs, different types of advertisements on across all different channels, right? It could be something as subtle as an advertisement on radio or on TV, social media, to marketing strategies like a bottle or bag being plastic bottle or bag being imprinted with please recycle, and that item is probably never going to be recycled, and that miscommunication, that misinformation, that makes us believe something else rather than the truth. And when the truth comes out, scientists and experts showing us, and also a lot of the science, when I say scientists, I mean community scientists, which are just everyday people in civil society that have said enough is enough and we need to understand this problem. Plastic is building up in our environment at an unprecedented rate, and especially with these microplastics and nanoplastics shedding off of all the plastics around us, we just have a huge problem on our hands. So it can feel so overwhelming. So I like to tell people, okay, let's consider all of these facts, and then let's think about, how do we solve this? Well, the very first thing we need to do is turn off the tap of new plastics production, because, and this is a very commonly used metaphor, but you wouldn't start mopping up your bathroom floor if your bathtub was overflowing. You would turn off the faucet first. You wouldn't just let the problem get worse before you do something about it. And so while cleanups have been long, encouraged by industries, which has also been, I want to add, parroted by governments that say, oh, municipalities, like, let's get people together for a cleanup. And cleanups can be a great way for people to get like a hands-on experience of the issue, to see the issue up close in their community and maybe meet other people who care about it, but it's not the solution in and of itself, at least not right now, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I always say we need to hold these industries accountable. And what does that really look like in practice? And how do you convince a whole socioeconomic system and really like the foundations of our existence, everything that is, all the material items that have existed are being rapidly replaced by plastic more and more. Like most of our clothing is plastic. Most of the products that we cook with are plastic. Our housing materials are plastic. I could go on and on. Often when I'm speaking to communities, especially students, they'll start looking around themselves and be like, oh no, this is made out of plastic and that's made out of plastic. And it's so overwhelming. So to know that, at least the single-use plastic items, if we can start there and say, well, we used to live in a world where reuse was much more common, or we like to say reuse, refill, repairing, and sharing are some really good plastic-free principles. I work now with Plastic Pollution Coalition, communicating about the truth about plastics full time. So if we can focus on these principles, which totally reduce your waste footprint, just generally, it's not just plastics, but it's all stuff, just not wasting. And recycling is not actually on that list, right? So recycling is not a first priority. We really need to get into the habit of endlessly reusing the things that we have. Because if we don't do that, we are going to create more waste. It's very expensive to recycle. It's not that it's bad per se, but with plastics, each successive round of recycling reintroduces new contaminants, not only into the environment, but into the plastic itself. So recycled plastics are more contaminated because it's kind of like concentrating the chemical load. Often additives are put into recycled plastic as well to keep its integrity, because every time the plastic is heated and shredded up, it loses some of its useful qualities. So it is very complicated, but right now we're looking at, actually right this instance, we're talking on May 30th, 2023, and UN member states are now in Paris, France, negotiating a global plastics treaty, which is definitely unprecedented. But the issue lies here is like, how do we write that treaty? And how do we ensure that it involves turning off the tap? That's the big question now.
Yeah. Yeah. That's super interesting. It'll be interesting to see what comes out of it. I know you talk in the book a little bit about past attempts to do this globally and how the US has not been super keen to participate, but maybe it'll be different this time. Since writing the book, has there been anything notable in this movement that you've seen? Do you think awareness has grown?
Yeah, so I'm really happy to report that, especially since I first began writing the book, like in 2016, where most people, I would say, still thought of plastic as a marine litter or like ocean focused issue, despite plastic being produced and used mostly on land. So again, shifting the story, shifting the narrative from, oh, let's recycle and clean up, to really let's prevent this problem from happening in the first place. And I think personally, like seeing many people engage in more plastic-free habits, such as reuse, refill, repairing, and sharing. Like in my own community, there are repair cafes, which are basically these little get-togethers where a public space will provide like coffee and cake, and you're there with your neighbors, and people can help each other repair their torn clothing or broken bicycles and whatnot. Like everyone has skills, right? So we can all share those skills we have to help people keep the material items they have longer, so they don't need to buy new ones. They don't need to pay for repairing them. They can do something like that together. Reuse and refill systems are sprouting up everywhere, it seems, which is really cool. And these are as simple as, a mom and pop shop saying, we're going to sell food in bulk bins rather than, individually packaged products. to people who are starting businesses that revolve around reuse and refill systems. So like steel containers for certain products that are returned and refilled, kind of like thinking of the milkman back in the day of like, I'm thinking about my grandparents and they would tell stories like, oh, there was a person who used to come to our doorstep and drop off milk or soda even in glass, and then collect the empty bottles, refill it, and then drop it off again. And very similar to that, those kind of businesses are cropping up. So and then lastly, of course, sharing. There's a lot of different opportunities to share, like different apps and groups online where people can swap items. And this just, again, feeds into the zero waste kind of lifestyle that we'll need to get out of this plastic age that we're stuck in.
Yeah. Yeah, while you were talking, I was thinking about how I was at a store where they had all this pre-made food and you could choose whether to have it in plastic or in glass. And the glass had a deposit, so you could return the glass and get the money back. And then I was thinking, why isn't it all just glass? So people have no choice. But also in the book, you bring up this importance for humans of, I don't know, sort of thinking about transition and transitioning away from the single-use plastic bag at the grocery store by using paper bags, like transitioning more slowly to help our mind, like wrap our minds around it. And now I'm thinking, actually maybe that contrast at that store is very important, because then you have humans asking themselves, oh, why would I choose the glass one over a plastic one? And like making them think about why they're making the decisions they're making rather than being on autopilot.
Exactly. Yeah. It
Yeah.
is an intentional choice. And I think, and this is very interesting too, because, a lot of this issue with plastic is based around consumption and consumerism. So we all need to consume as humans, but we don't need to be consumptive or consumerist in the way that we need to buy endlessly. And that's the problem with plastics, is that they're largely sold for single use or at least limited use. And then they're the perfect consumer product because you have to keep buying them and throwing them away. There's not, you can reuse some plastic, sure, for people have used, and this is an argument against, I'm not saying that we should do this, but I'm saying people have used this as an argument against bag bans, but like, oh, well, I use the plastic bag at the grocery store to line my garbage bin. But it's like, well, should we even be using plastic bags to line our garbage bins, right? You're just wrapping more trash in something that will never decompose. So it's kind of, again, like undoing our mindset or like the things that we've thought about plastic to get into a different mindset. And that can take time, but it also is often more economical. And I like to point that out to people too, because we don't want to commodify the solutions. And I think, it is great that businesses are creating new solutions, but we have to make sure that they're affordable and accessible to all people and not just these exclusive kind of like bougie, out of reach, like, fancy things that are not going to serve most people. We have to get things that are accessible. And I remind people, like, I engage in my own life in a lot of like plastic free habits, and I'm not perfect yet because I I'm human too, and it's not easy, but if something as simple as like saving the glass jars when you go to the grocery store from peanut butter or jam, because if you can try to buy things that are not wrapped in plastic, save the jars, use them for your leftovers instead of Tupperware containers that are toxic plastic. Like things like that can go a long way, and you will actually save money in the long run, wasting less. So that's pretty cool. If you have older people or elders in your life, like talking to them about what they did when they were in their youth can also reveal many interesting solutions. Like I remember going to Antigua and meeting an elder person, and she was telling me that, back in the day, she would go to the baker and there were no bags or wrappers for the bread. You just brought a tea towel from your house, and then you had a reusable cloth bag that you carried with you to the grocery store and the shops, and you would just wrap the bread in the tea towel. So you bring that home, and it's so simple. It's astonishingly simple, to the point where people are like, wow, I never thought of that, because we're just so used to getting that single use plastic bag around everything. So things like that. Or in Southeast Asia, people were telling me that, just a few decades ago, most foods were wrapped in banana leaves, which are biodegradable. Um, so yeah, there's a lot we can do, that's the good news. And these things have already been shown to work. So that's great.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, well, thank you so much for taking the time to share your wisdom with us. And is there anything you want to leave the listeners with in terms of why they should read your book?
Oh, well, I would love for you to read my book, is like not only to get solutions on your radar and really understand, because I do think that knowledge is power, and the truth is coming out, but I tried to really distill it in a way that honors and celebrates people who have been working really hard to get the truth out there. And I think giving them your time is definitely worth it. Yeah, I did include a lot of my own adventures, sailing, and kind of having more of an adventurous look at the issue. But I think that even along that journey, there's a lot that I hope to share, that I've gleaned. So one of the biggest takeaways is, living at sea and learning about living simply and how enriching that is to our lives.
Mm,
Um, so I hope to share those things with people. And I just also want to say that solutions exist, and they exist today, and we can all be a part of them.
awesome. Thanks so much, Erica.
Thank you for having me.